Good evening and welcome to this edition of Africa in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, historian, podcast entrepreneur. And in this week's edition of Africa in Focus is a special World Cup special. So during the World Cup, we'll be doing a lot of football podcasts. So this is the first in this World Cup series, looking at the African teams that have made it to the World Cup, looking at who will make it out of the groups, who will make it to the last 16 knockout stages, and also those African teams that we feel will go to the quarterfinals and further. All right, so before we start the show, just to make you aware that if you like what you hear, please share to your friends, family, social media networks. Subscribe to Ghana African Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you. We're also on Spotify. Look out for Ghana African Focus on Spotify. Hit the follow button, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast on Spotify, Spotify will notify you. All right, and if you want help to donate to the show, to continue to bring you great content coming from Africa and also from Ghana, you can donate if you like. So you can donate as little as $3 a month. You can either be a one-off payment or it can be a monthly subscription. So I'll leave you the link as to how you can donate in the finance to the show. All right, so let's get into the podcast today, looking about Africa and the World Cup. So we're talking about football, politics, and power. So the World Cup kicks off in about 2 weeks' time, and Africa is sending 10 nations to the tournament. So that's South Africa, Morocco, Ivory Coast, Tunisia, Egypt, Cape Verde, Senegal, Algeria, DR Congo, and Ghana. So more African teams than ever before. However, the same old questions remain. Who actually gets out of the group stage? Who survives the knockouts? And who carries the continent, or the hope of the continent, the furthest? So in this episode, we're going to be breaking down every African team, their strengths, their weaknesses, their group dynamics, and their realistic ceiling in this tournament. So no hype, no fancy, just plain, unadulterated truth. And then we go deeper, because even with all the talent, all the passion, and all this potential, Africa still faces a structural war at the World Cup. A war that we'll explain later on, built by politics, economics, FIFA power, and global football equality. So today's episode has two missions. So one, predict which African teams will make the round of 32, the round of 16, and the quarterfinals. And also explain honestly why no African team has ever won the World Cup and why under this current global football system, none ever will. So this is not about doubting African talent, far from it. It's about exposing the politics and economic realities that shape global football. All right, so without further ado, let's get into a podcast today, looking, giving you a deeper analysis of the World Cup that kicks off on June 11th. So let's look at the group. So let's look at South Africa. South Africa are in Group A, alongside Mexico, South Korea, and Czech Republic. So South Africa's strength. So they're very, very organized under Hugo Bruce. And we saw with the last AFCON, they had, I think they made the quarterfinals, last AFCON. And they're tactically disciplined and they're good in transitions. The weaknesses, however, is that they lack elite matchness at World Cup level. Yeah? And they struggle when they have to chase a game. So my prediction is that South Africa will finish third, fighting with South Korea and Czech Republic. And with the expanded format, they have an outside chance of sneaking into the round of 32 as the best third team, in the group stages. So, however, from my viewpoint, there could potentially be an early group exit from by South Africa because they're in a tough group. South Korea are the cream of group of Asia. Mexico obviously playing the tournament in their own back garden alongside the US and Canada. And Czech Republic also a strong team, maybe not a top pedigree European team like England, France, Spain, but they can cause South Africa problems. So the best for South Africa will be to finish third, yeah, or worst case scenario, not make it out of the group. All right, so Group C has another African team, Morocco, and they'll be in Group C alongside Brazil, Haiti, and Scotland. So Morocco's strengths, they're essentially the best organized African side. And don't forget, they're semi-finalists in 2022, the first African team to make it to the semi-finals in the World Cup. And also they have elite defensive structure with the likes of Achraf Hakimi. They got a strong European-based core and also big game experience. Obviously playing, in the Afcon final this year, and also, a lot of their players play in the big teams of Europe, as we saw tonight. PSG beat Arsenal in the Champions League final, and a couple of the PSG team play for Morocco, i.e. Hakimi, and there's one other guy that plays for Morocco as well. So, they're very, very well organized and put together, even though they've lost their manager, who took him to the World Cup semi-final in 2022, and also the Afcon final this year. They've lost a manager. However, Morocco still maintained the core of that team that made the semi-finals in 2022, and also that were finalists in the African Cup of Nations this year. Even though CAF have awarded to Morocco, it is still pending the arbitration, sports governing body arbitration. So hasn't it been decided yet if Senegal, who won it initially, before it being sent to Morocco. So we wait to see who wins the African Cup of Nations. But Morocco, are a strong team in the African game. Now, their weaknesses, they struggle when they must dominate weaker teams. So Haiti could be a potential banana skin for them. Yeah. And there's also heavy emotional and physical load from being, the best ranked team in Africa. So my prediction for Group C, where Morocco is that Brazil is likely to top the group. Yeah, even though Brazil sometimes started to deceive, Brazil do have a good group of players. Obviously, the Alisson in goal plays for Liverpool. They've got, Gabriel in defense, who plays for Arsenal. They've got Thiago Silva, who has had a great season for Bournemouth. They've also got Vinicius Jr., who has had a great season with Real Madrid, and they've got many, many other quality players. But it's about getting Brazil to play the team, which would be, Ancelotti's biggest challenge. But you would expect Brazil to top the group. That contains obviously Haiti, Scotland, and Morocco. And I think Morocco, definitely better than Haiti, to beat Haiti, and at least equal to Scotland. So my prediction: Morocco to qualify from the group, possibly second, if not third, but definitely looking to finish the runners up to Brazil. And they are certain to qualify for the knockout round stages of the cup, i.e. the round of 32. And I back them also to reach the last 16 again. So we look at Ivory Coast, they're in Group E, alongside Germany, Ecuador, and Curacao. So Ivory Coast strength, or La Côte d'Ivoire strength, they're quite a physical team. Obviously, past Afcon champions from a couple of years ago. They have a strong spine, particularly defense and midfield. And also, they're used to high-pressure games. Obviously, what we saw in the Afcon final of 2023, when they beat Nigeria 2-1. So, the weakness is that they can be technically naive against top European sides. So this is not the Ivory Coast of Drogba, Salomon Kalou, and others. Yeah, this team is still a pretty young team, even though they won AFCON a couple of years ago, they still struggle against, you know, your France, your Germany, your England, etc. So that's the weakness as well. And also inconsistent finishing. So they haven't got a top striker like they had with Didier Drogba. So Ivory Coast, you know, where they're going to get their goals from is a lot to be seen. Now, having said that, though, Germany are going to win the group. Ecuador, South Americans are very tactically, you know, astute, and they can tackle as well. So they are rugged and tournament savvy. And Curacao are debutants, but tricky. Obviously, Curacao's in the Caribbean. So for me, Ivory Coast should qualify from the group, either as second or third. And you know, and given that, they will definitely make the round of 32, but I don't expect them to go further than that. Now, Tunisia, next African team, featuring Group F, alongside the Netherlands, Japan, and Sweden. This is a very tough group for Tunisia. So their strengths is that they are a compact team, again, with North African teams tactically disciplined, hard to break down. And they've got good tournament experience, particularly in the Afcon. I think this is their first World Cup for about, I think since 2018 in Russia, I believe. They made 2022, so I think it's the first tournament since, you know, Russia or even 2010. Yeah. Now the weaknesses, again, lack of attacking firepower. So Tunisia haven't got, you know, a renowned striker and haven't got, you know, a renowned great attacking force. And again, historically struggle to turn draws into wins at World Cups. So I think they're going to be the first casualty of the African team. So this is a brutal group for Tunisia, because Netherlands, Japan, Sweden are all strong, disciplined, structured sides. Yeah. So I don't think Tunisia are going to qualify from this group at all. And it's most likely that they'll finish last in the group. Yeah. So my prediction is that Tunisia will exit at the group stage. All right. So moving on. We now look at Egypt. And they are in Group G, alongside Belgium, Iran, and New Zealand. So Egypt's strength, obviously Mo Salah is fit, you know. So Mo Salah, you know, is not the player that he was a few years ago. However, you know, he's fit. He's played a lot for Liverpool this season, and he should be fresh because he hasn't played too many games this season for Liverpool. So he should be fresh. And also, Egypt do have strong defensive base, as like I said, with all North African teams, and they also got tournament experience. They won the last World Cup, yeah, and they've also got good game management in tight matches, as we saw in the Afcon, yeah. So, however, the weaknesses are that there's too much reliance on Salah. So if Mo Salah doesn't really fire, then the likes of Trezeguet and others do not really come to the fore. So there's too much reliance for me on Salah with Egypt. And also another weakness is that they can be conservative when they concede first. So if they concede first, yeah, then they don't really attack as they should do. And that can cause a problem for Egypt, particularly if they play top teams. So my prediction, you know, Belgium, this is the last of the golden generation of Belgium. You know, you got De Bruyne, you got Lukaku, you got you know, Courtois in goal for Belgium. You know, this is the last saloon of this Belgian generation that have failed to deliver. And so, you know, Belgium are favorites for the group. And you would think that Egypt should beat New Zealand, definitely, because they're the underdogs, but they can be tricky. But I do believe Egypt have enough pedigree to beat New Zealand. But the key game is Egypt versus Iran. So Iran will not be a pushover, but you would expect Egypt to at least beat Iran or get a draw. So I reckon that Egypt will finish second or a strong third, meaning that they'll qualify for the last 32 and possibly the round of 16 if they have a favorable draw. All right, let's move on to Cape Verde. So they're debutants in this World Cup, Cape Verde, yeah, and they are in Group H alongside Spain, who are one of the favorites for the World Cup, Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia. Now, Cape Verde's strength, they're tactically astute, tactically neat, and they've got that, fearless underdog energy that we saw in Afrikan 23, where they pushed above their weight. So, obviously this Afrikan didn't do too well, but Afrikan 2023, they did pretty well. I think they made the quarterfinals. So, if they can play anywhere near to that, they could give a shock or two. However, one of their key weaknesses is that they lack depth in the squad, and there isn't. And obviously, this is their first time in the World Cup, so they got no experience at the level. So the margins are very, very tiny indeed. So prediction, obviously, it's a very, very tough group. So Spain and Uruguay should qualify from the group alongside Saudi Arabia. And we feel that Cape Verde will not, qualify unless they can get a shock result against Saudi Arabia. I don't see them beating Spain. I don't see them even beating Uruguay as well. Yeah, but if they can beat Saudi Arabia, you never know. But, it's going to be a tough group for Cape Verde, even to finish third. So my prediction, unfortunately, a group stage exit. However, they can make one same performance, particularly against Saudi Arabia. Now, next African team to look at is Senegal. And then Group I with France, Norway, and Iraq. Now, Senegal are one of Africa's most complete squads. They've got a great goalkeeper, Edwin Mendy, strong defense, midfield, attack, and a strong attack. Like so Sadio Mane, Ibrahim Sarr, and others. Nicolas Jackson, had a good season with Bayern Munich on loan. So, yep, they have a very, very strong spine to the team. And with Senegal, they've got a big game mentality. Obviously, African winners, and also they've had World Cup experience, particularly last World Cup in Qatar. Now, the weaknesses is that they're depending on a few key players for goals. So if Mane and Nicolas Jackson and Ismail Sarr didn't score goals, then you wonder where the goals are going to come from. And also, they can be too cautious in knockout games. Like we saw with England, they give England too much respect in the Qatar, in the last 16 games that they played with England. I feel England were there for the taking in that game, but they gave England too much respect, and England beat them comfortably 2-0. Now, prediction. Obviously, France have their star-studded team like Mbappe, Dembele, Camavinga, Doué, the rump of the PSG team, they are going to top the group. However, Senegal should be better than Iraq. They should be able to beat Iraq and should be able to beat Norway, even though Norway have got the circle goal machine, Erling Haaland, and also got Martin Odegaard of Arsenal. I think Senegal, with their firepower and their strong spine, should be able to beat Norway. So given that then, my prediction is that Senegal will finish second to France and qualify for the round of 12 and possibly round of 16. So for me, they're one of two teams that are back to a quarterfinals, and we'll go on to that soon. Now, Algeria. Algeria are in Group J, alongside current champions Argentina, Austria, and newbies Jordan. So Algeria's strengths have technical quality is pretty good. They have a strong contingent of diaspora players, spearheaded by Riyad Mahrez, and they're good on the ball. They can control the game, against mid-tier sides. However, in terms of weaknesses, they can have defensive lapse at key moments. Yeah, as we saw in this year's Afcon, and also mental fragility in tournaments. So they won Afcon 2019 obviously in North Africa, but they didn't travel too well. Yeah, and this hampers Algeria's progress. So prediction. So for me, Argentina will win the group, and Messi is going to be in the team. I thought Messi would retire following the last World Cup, but he's in the squad this time round. So Messi will be there alongside Julian Alvarez, alongside Enzo Fernandez. They have a very, very strong team. Basically, the rump of that team that won 4 years ago in Qatar. So Argentina should top the group. Austria are solid, but Jordan are debutants, and Algeria should be able to beat Jordan. Yeah. So again, I'd say Algeria will fight for second place along with Austria. And given that, they should be able to reach round of 32, maybe round of 16, if they are able to click it and get it together. Next is DR Congo, and they are in Group K, alongside Portugal, Colombia, and Uzbekistan. So DR Congo's strength is that they're physically strong, and this is their first World Cup for about 50 years. Yeah. And they're dangerous in transitions and set pieces. Weaknesses, though, is that the tactics can be inconsistent at times. Yeah. And also, because this is their first World Cup in 50 years, they haven't got much big-time experience or big tournament experience. Yes, they were Afcon this year where there was a surprise package, but compared to the other teams in their group, they haven't got that much pedigree in terms of big game experience. So my prediction is that Portugal, with their star-studded team, that has the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo, Bruno Fernandes, Thiago Bernardo Silva play for City, and others. Colombia as well are going to be heavy favorites. Yeah, Uzbekistan from Central Asia are technically sharp and hungry and can cause DR Congo a few problems, but that's a big game. If DR Congo, don't get anything from Portugal and Colombia, then they're going to beat Uzbekistan. So if they beat Uzbekistan, they should qualify after the group. If not, if they draw or lose, then DR Congo will exit at the group stages. But it all bodes well going forward if they're able to perform admirably within the group stages. Now, last but not least, Ghana. Ghana are in Group L with alongside England, Croatia, and Panama. So Ghana's strength. So they're not the team of Asamoah Gyan, Michael Essien, Stephen Appiah, Suleiman Tabi, etc. However, your young, dynamic squad with a strong European-based core, and they'll be spearheaded by Man City's Antoine Semenyo, who's had a fantastic season with Bournemouth and then since January with Man City. Yeah. Now, despite, for me, I think Ghana should have picked a lot from the diaspora. People like Daniel Welbeck, even though he's 36, he can qualify to play for Ghana. He ain't going to play for England, so Ghana should have called Daniel Welbeck, who's been in good form for Brighton this season. Also, Callum Hudson-Odoi, who plays for Nottingham Forest, has a great season for Forest as well. Forest made the semi-final of the Europa League, losing to the champions Aston Villa in the semi-final, and Callum Hudson-Odoi was a major part of that success. So again, Ghana missed out on him. I don't know if he's in the squad, but for me, they're the two key players who Ghana could have called. That would, give support to, Antoine Semenyo. I know Partey's in the team, former Arsenal. I had a good season with Villarreal. Villarreal finished third in La Liga. And also Kudus, he was injured for most of last season in the English Premier League. I'm not sure if it's going to be a fit in time for the World Cup, but you know, Ghana has, you know, a young squad who are hungry, and also they do have big tournament experience. You know, from the likes of 26 and particularly 2010, when Ghana became the first African team to make the quarterfinal of a World Cup. Well, sorry, the third team to be quarterfinal of the World Cup after Cameroon, and yeah, and you know, like I said, Ghana are not the team of that era. So you know, we look at their weaknesses now. Ghana have got defensive instability. They're not the team, like I said, you know, that were very defensive minded under Milo, and also given the fact that they sacked Otto Addo recently in the last month or so, in the last couple of months, you know, the coach and tactical identity have been inconsistent for recent years, yeah, and that's culminated in the sacking of Otto Addo. So now they've got Carlos Queiroz, who basically has had about 6 weeks to put his squad together and get his tactical ideas across to the team, and that might not bode well for wanting to go further in this World Cup. And so, prediction: England or Croatia are favourites on paper to be first and second. Panama are beatable, but very tricky team from the Caribbean. So Ghana's first game is against Panama, and very crucial. If Ghana win that, then they can definitely guarantee finishing third. If they don't, if they get a draw, then they're going to struggle against England and a wily Croatia, you know, headed by what's his name? Guy plays for, he's 40. What's his name? Oh, Croatian guy. What's his name? Not Village. Oh, what's his name? Play for Real Madrid. Now at AC Milan. Know his name? Yeah, Modric. Yeah. So you know, Ghana. It's a crucial that Ghana beats Panama in their first game to stand even a chance of qualifying from that group. So, prediction: I think Ghana will finish third, with a chance of qualifying for one of the best third place teams to go to the last 32. Yeah. And as they get to the last 32, possible last 16 if they get a favorable draw. So we've talked about the group stages and who we feel will qualify from the groups. Now we move on to round 16 and the quarterfinal. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, likely African teams to reach the round of 32, the knockout stages, for me are Morocco, Senegal, Egypt, Ivory Coast, Algeria, and possibly Ghana. Round of 16, Morocco, Senegal, Egypt, and possibly either Ivory Coast, Algeria, and probably Ghana. Now, quarterfinal, which is a big ask, I think the only two teams for me, realistically, that can get to the quarterfinal, depending on the draw, is Morocco and Senegal. Yeah. Now, the African team to go furthest, yeah, I did call Afcon, you know, I did say Morocco would win it, yeah, even though they made the final, they didn't win it, but Senegal proved to be a very strong team. But I believe Morocco are the most likely African team to go furthest. Why? Because they got that pedigree of 2022. You know, they've got elite defensive structure. They've got strong European club core. And also, they've got a group that is tough but manageable. Yeah. Even though they've got Brazil, I think they're still qualified from the group. And the more they go on, I think the more they'll be able to, you know, grow in the tournament. And also, Senegal will be my other team to go, African team to go further in the tournament. Again, they've got a complete squad, have a strong mentality, and also they've been together for quite some time. However, they've got a tougher path, you know, to get to the quarterfinal, let alone semi-final. Now, this is where we come to a very interesting point in the podcast. Why no African team has ever won the World Cup or will ever win the World Cup under current politics? Yeah. So I'm not saying that African teams aren't good enough, right? What I'm saying is that, and many of you are not aware of this, right? The system is designed so they never fully arrive. We all saw that Nigerian team of 1994 to me the best African team to make a World Cup. Nigeria should probably won that tournament, yeah, but because of local nuances and politics, right, Nigeria were kicked out by Italy, right, who made the final of that tournament in '94. Let me give you some reasons why an African team will never win the World Cup, yeah? So firstly, you got European club power versus African national teams, yeah? So obviously the best African players play in Europe, yeah? Now the clubs control the minutes that they get, like Mo Salah for Liverpool this year, injuries, release timing, yeah? Also preparation windows. Very, very important. Yeah. So the clubs, so this is why some African players don't want to play for their national teams because of the club control. Because obviously the clubs pay their wages, and that can sometimes lead to a club the country dynamic, particularly when it comes to Afcon. Because I think Afcon is during the middle of the European seasons, and sometimes the European clubs don't want to release the African players. Also, another reason why is that European and South American teams often arrive with more cohesion and better preparation. We all know that there's teams, from Africa that come underprepared, not enough quality time training, the sports psychology, etc. And even there's issues to do with, not being paid and what have you, bonuses, what have you. So all this contributes to why, when it comes to World Cup, right, African teams haven't got that stability and peace of mind. Now, very importantly, another issue why an African team will never win the World Cup is because of FIFA seeding, ranking, and structural bias. Yeah. Now, FIFA rankings and seeding favor teams from Europe and Central and South America. Yeah. African teams often end up in harder groups, as you've seen in this edition, whereby I've broken down the teams that African countries will play against, yeah, and also tougher knockout paths. Like I mentioned, Senegal. So if Senegal get out of the group, they've got a really tough path, even to get to the quarterfinal, yeah. And this is typical of how FIFA structures World Cup. That doesn't give African teams much of a chance. So even when they're strong, yeah, they are not seeded. So really, you would have thought that Morocco and Senegal would have been seeded, given the fact that they're the two best teams in Africa. But because of FIFA politics, right, no African team is seeded. Yeah. So an African team has to survive a harder group, then face a giant area in the knockouts. So, for example, Morocco could, if Morocco get out of their group, Morocco could face Spain in the last 32 or England. Is that fair? So another reason why an African team will not win the World Cup is because of refereeing, soft power, and big nation protection. Now check this, right? This is not about conspiracy theory, it's about reality. Now, marginal decisions tend to favor traditional powers. Like I said, when we go back to 94, Nigeria against Italy, and Nigeria were winning, I think, 2-1 or 1-0. And then Italy got a very, very dubious penalty in the last minute of the game. Yeah. So Nigeria would have got to the quarterfinal, but Italy scored that penalty and went on to beat Nigeria in that round, in that last 16 game in the 1994 World Cup. So these marginal decisions always favor the traditional powers. Yeah. And even going back, when England beat Cameroon 1990 World Cup, I think there were two quite dodgy penalty decisions, or one of them was dodgy anyway. Yeah. Against the Cameroon, and England scored 2 penalties and made it to the quarterfinal. So these always, favor the big powers. Also, there's commercial interests involved. So TV sponsors and marketing campaigns or marketing companies always align with the big European or South American nations. Also, African teams have less political weight inside of FIFA. Yeah. And finally, or rather going on, infrastructure, preparation, and politics is a big key factor as to why an African team will never win the World Cup. Let me break it down. So many African FAs or football associations are plagued by bonuses, late bonuses, as we saw in Ghana, 2014, when they played in, the Brazil, when it was hosted in Brazil, I think, $5 million have to be thrown out of Ghana for the players to get their bonus or whatever. We've seen that with Nigeria as well, even with Cameroon recently. So it hampers the team effort, things like late bonuses, also poor logistics, also poor preparation, coaching instability, case of Ghana. With less than 2 months to go, you start Otoado, and now you got a replacement just weeks before the World Cup. That's hardly ample time to get to your place and prepare, let alone get a formation and tactical announced going through. And also, as we know, there's internal politics too much in African football. So whether it's the Confederation of African Football, CAF, or whether it's individual FAs like Ghana FA or Nigeria FA, there's too much internal politics. We look at what we saw with Cameroon, yeah, with Samuel Eto'o, yeah, Saki Rigobert Song, yeah, as coach. With all these politics, yeah, is the reason why our African team will never win the World Cup. You compare that to the professionalism of your France, your Germany, your Brazil, Argentina, Spain, etc. Yeah? So talent alone does not win the World Cup. Systems do. And we've got to change systems in Africa, particularly around in our national football associations, if the African team is ever going to win the World Cup. And lastly, the calendar and fatigue. So most African players often arrive at World Cups either overplayed in Europe, carrying injuries, or with minimal tactical camp time. Yeah? However, top European squads are built around players from a handful of clubs like City, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, etc. So the chemistry is already there. So these are some of the reasons why an African team will never, ever win the World Cup. And so in closing, that's the landscape behind the World Cup. 10 African nations step onto the world stage, some ready to shock the world, like Morocco and Senegal, some fighting for survival, like Ghana, and very few carrying the weight of the continent. Morocco and Senegal look like the teams most likely to push into the latter rounds of the World Cup. Egypt, Ivory Coast, Algeria, and possibly Ghana have the tools to make noise if the draw falls their way. But the bigger truth remains, Africa's ceiling at the World Cup is not defined by talent, it is defined by power, by FIFA ceiling, by European club control, by preparation inequality, by refereeing politics, by the fact that African football is treated as a talent mine, not a global priority. Africa produces world-class players, but not world-class conditions. And until the political and economic structure of world football changes, African teams will always be fighting uphill. But here's the hope. Glass ceilings can be broken, systems can be challenged, and every tournament gives Africa another chance to push the line a little further. So, this has been Africa in Focus World Cup Special. If you enjoyed the breakdown, share the episode and follow the show and tune in for the next one. And during the World Cup, we'll be having some more African football podcasts, looking about how the teams are doing, how they're fared, and also, who makes up the group. So we're going to probably have like a weekly particularly after the first run of games, see how the African teams are doing. So watch out for more Football Africa podcasts coming soon during the World Cup. So for myself, Kwame, and from all the crew here on Africa in Focus, is thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next edition of Africa in Focus.